The Truth About Happiness, What They Don't Teach You, by Audible Insights. Introduction. You've carried a silent weight, a nagging sense that no matter how hard you try, something within you remains unsettled. In lonely moments, you've asked yourself why true contentment always seems just out of reach, as though life keeps dangling it like a fleeting promise. This doubt can feel suffocating, as if you're on a frantic search for a missing piece that will finally make you feel whole. Yet here's the truth. There is nothing inherently broken about you. The tension you feel arises from beliefs and expectations you never agreed to in the first place. Imagine standing in front of a house you've lived in your entire life. You've never questioned the cracks in its walls or the creaking floors until they start to give way under your feet. That moment of collapse, frightening as it may seem, is also the moment of your greatest opportunity. You finally see that patching over the cracks isn't enough. A deeper, more fundamental rebuild is needed to feel grounded and safe within yourself. This journey is a deconstruction of the illusions that have steered your choices and colored your emotions. With each layer peeled back, you'll rediscover a core resilience and self-trust that's been buried, but never truly lost. By the end, you won't simply feel better. You'll have a radically new understanding of yourself and your life. This isn't about rushing toward a finish line. It's about shifting the foundation so every step beyond is free, unencumbered, and wholly yours. Chapter 1. Cracked Foundation. You might be wondering why you've repeatedly felt that dull ache of emptiness, even when everything seems fine on the surface. It's as if there's a subtle crack in the foundation of your life, some unspoken flaw that undermines each new plan or aspiration. This realization can feel jarring, especially if you've worked hard to keep your doubts hidden. The truth is, a lot of those doubts don't originate from you. They trace back to stories you were handed before you even knew what was happening. These stories might have come from family members, peers, or society's unrelenting messages that scream, "You're not good enough." Over time, that sentiment calcifies, and you may have mistakenly believed it was your own voice. It's startling to see how quietly these inherited narratives shape your perceptions. Imagine a seedling planted in tainted soil. It grows, but its roots intertwine with everything in the ground, including the toxins. In a similar way, you've grown around beliefs that seemed harmless at first, until you notice the steady corrosion they cause deep within. The foundation of your self-image becomes riddled with stress fractures, and you unconsciously adjust your behavior to avoid testing the cracks. You take fewer risks, hide parts of yourself, and maybe even chase goals that you think will prove your worth. But the more you strive to cover these foundational fissures with quick fixes, the more they widen. Recognizing the cracks is a moment of clarity rather than a sign of failure. It's like flipping on a light in a dimly lit basement and finally seeing the damage. At first, you might feel overwhelmed, but you're also gifted with the knowledge that something must change. This chapter asks you to question which stories have shaped your idea of normal. Rather than viewing this exploration as proof that something is wrong with you, see it as a vital first step toward genuine renewal. You're not here to wallpaper over the damage. You're here to rebuild from the ground up. Start by pinpointing one belief you've carried for a long time, perhaps the idea that success is only real if others acknowledge it, or that you must avoid conflict at all costs. Trace it back as far as you can. Did you pick it up from a parent who feared rejection, or from a social environment that prized conformity? Next, notice the ways this inherited mindset still influences your current decisions. Maybe you remained silent in group discussions, or you push yourself to exhaustion trying to please everyone else. In becoming aware of this chain reaction, you begin to see how one seemingly innocent belief can produce a ripple effect on everything from relationships to career choices. Now, examine the cracks with fresh eyes and consider how to reset your foundation. One practical way is to challenge the logic behind each limiting belief. If you believe you must be perfect to be loved, question when you first accepted that. Did you make that choice, or was it simply handed to you? Write down moments in your life that contradict this belief. Perhaps there were times you were far from perfect, yet still received love and acceptance. By unearthing examples of a more expansive truth, you weaken the hold of that inherited narrative. This isn't a quick fix, but an ongoing process of noticing, questioning, and replacing. Each time you take even a small action from a place of self-trust rather than self-doubt, you reinforce a sturdier internal framework. As you close this chapter, remember that the cracks aren't your identity. They're symptoms of mismatched beliefs that can be restructured. If you've ever seen an old building carefully restored, you know the process involves peeling back layers to reveal the core before reinforcing it. That's precisely what you're doing, a conscious restoration of your sense of worth, done with clarity and intention. From this point on, you're not fixing a broken person. You're shedding beliefs that never belonged to you in the first place. This decision to re-examine your foundation isn't just about feeling better. It's about experiencing yourself differently, with an unshakable understanding that you're allowed to stand firmly on your own ground. As we move forward, we'll continue exploring those hidden structures in your mind, unveiling how they shape your life, and how to build upon a foundation that truly supports who you are becoming. Chapter 2. The Lie of More. It's tempting to believe that if you could just have a little more money, more recognition, more security, you'd finally feel satisfied. Yet deep down, you sense the hollowness of this chase. The constant pursuit of external achievements can feel like running on a treadmill that goes nowhere, leaving you with the quiet suspicion that no matter how much you accumulate, it won't fill the persistent void inside. If this resonates, you're likely trapped in the illusion that more is the answer to an unspoken question about your sense of self. Picture standing in front of a vending machine that only dispenses short-lived gratification. Each time you press the button, you get a quick rush, but soon after, the emptiness returns. The world teaches you to keep pressing that button. Get another promotion, buy a bigger home, or chase a new relationship. Meanwhile, the underlying thirst for genuine contentment remains unquenched. It's like trying to satisfy deep hunger with empty calories. You get a brief high, but the true nourishment you seek never arrives. What if the real issue isn't that you lack something external, but that you've never given yourself permission to feel whole without it? One eye-opening step you can take is to step back from the next acquisition or achievement you're eyeing. Pause and imagine you get what you want. Then ask, how do I think I'll feel once I have it? Safe? Proud? Valuable? The key is recognizing that this feeling is already accessible within you, but you've associated it with the presence of an external prize. By identifying the specific emotion you're longing for, you can begin to cultivate it from the inside, no longer hostage to outer circumstances. Try experimenting with a small daily practice. The next time you catch yourself thinking, I wish I had this, redirect your energy inward. Ask how you can create that feeling right now. Perhaps you realize that what you truly want is a sense of accomplishment. Instead of waiting for a milestone, grant yourself credit for small wins. Maybe it's finishing a workout or showing kindness to a friend. This might seem trivial, but over time, the cumulative effect shifts your perspective, transforming you from a seeker of external more to a creator of internal abundance. Liberating yourself from the illusion of more requires honesty about why you believe you need it. If you feel unworthy in your current state, you might cling to the idea that having more will solve your inadequacy. Recognize that a future accomplishment or possession can't rewrite your fundamental worth. It can only mask insecurities for a while. This is why so many people meet big goals only to find themselves back in familiar dissatisfaction. They realize too late that the trophy was never the solution. Confronting this habit can spark anxiety, as if letting go of the pursuit leaves you aimless. But freedom unfolds when you see that you're allowed to define fulfillment in your own way. You can still aim for goals, but let them be expressions of your evolving self, rather than frantic attempts to fix something that was never broken. This shift in intent changes how you approach each aspiration. Life no longer becomes an endless scavenger hunt for external markers of success. Instead, it becomes a continuous practice of alignment, an ever-deepening conversation between your actions and your authentic needs. Moving forward, you'll sense a growing calm. The quiet parts of you that once panicked over scarcity begin to trust that you're no longer fueling the treadmill of more. Though you may still accomplish and acquire, these achievements happen within a broader landscape of self-acceptance rather than desperation. The irony is that true abundance often emerges once you stop chasing it. In the next chapters, you'll keep exploring how to uproot persistent illusions and replace them with a more nourishing perspective. one that frees you from believing that your worth is waiting somewhere outside of you. Chapter 3. Unmasking Perfection. Have you ever noticed how the drive to be perfect can feel like wearing an armor that gets heavier with every step? On the surface, perfectionism looks like a commitment to excellence, but it's often just a shield against the fear of judgment. You might pour endless energy into flawless appearances, impeccable work, or carefully curated social interactions, only to find yourself exhausted and disconnected. It's as if you're trapped behind a polished mask, terrified that any slip might reveal your true, vulnerable self. If the chase for perfection is weighing you down, you're not alone. Our culture subtly rewards perfectionism, praising those who appear to have it all together. But beneath the applause lies a persistent anxiety. One mistake could unravel it all. This heightened vigilance can lead to burnout or paralysis, making it tough to start or finish tasks because the outcome has to be nothing short of perfect. Yet when you look closely, perfectionism rarely brings genuine fulfillment. It traps you in a cycle of self-critique and unrelenting standards. To begin freeing yourself, imagine deliberately doing something with noticeable flaws. Perhaps it's writing a social media post that's heartfelt, but not worded perfectly, or attempting a new skill without trying to master it immediately. Observe the discomfort that arises, but also notice the sense of relief that comes when you realize no catastrophe follows. This small experiment cracks the facade of perfection, revealing that it's safe to be imperfect without losing your value. Over time, these moments add up, teaching you that what you fear, judgment or rejection, rarely materializes to the extent you imagined. Another useful approach is to ask what perfection is trying to protect you from. Often, it's a defense against shame or exposure, rooted in a deeper belief that your authentic self isn't enough. By tracing perfectionism back to its emotional roots, you uncover the tender spots in need of acceptance rather than constant policing. The more you acknowledge your inherent worth, the less you need the armor of flawlessness. This can be a messy journey filled with trial and error, but each moment of honest self-expression strengthens your capacity to be real instead of perfect. Embracing imperfection also allows space for genuine growth. When you're too rigid, there's no room for failure. And without failure, you miss out on the creative possibilities that emerge from experimentation. Think of a child learning to walk. They stumble repeatedly, yet each tumble is a step toward mastery. Adults often forget that stumbling is part of the process. By letting go of the need for immediate perfection, you open yourself to a broader range of experiences. And in the long run, you achieve more than you would if you were constantly hovering over every detail. As you lean into these small acts of imperfection, you'll likely feel lighter. That heavy cloak of self-criticism starts to slip off, and you discover a natural resilience in its place. The real gift isn't just the relief from the pressure of being flawless. It's the sense of wholeness that emerges when you allow yourself to be seen as you truly are. Freed from the constraints of an impossible ideal, you can focus on what genuinely matters to you. Every step on this path is an invitation to trade fear for authentic presence. As your journey continues, you'll see how each layer you strip away from your defenses brings you closer to the kind of life that feels deeply and unforgettably real. Chapter 4. Shattered Mirrors. Think about the mirrors you've relied on to form your self-image. Often these aren't literal mirrors, but the reflections offered by parents, friends, or random strangers on social media. Over time, you come to trust these reflections, building a sense of self-worth or self-doubt based on how others perceive you. The problem is, many of these mirrors are distorted, reflecting someone else's fears, projections, or biases back onto you. When you rely on them too heavily, you may end up with a fractured sense of who you are. The distortion often starts early. Maybe a teacher dismissed your creativity, or a caregiver criticized your emotional openness. Even if the feedback was well-intentioned, it might have taught you that certain traits were undesirable. In response, you learn to hide those parts of yourself. It's like constantly contorting your body to fit into ill-fitting clothing just because someone said you looked better that way. Over time, you forget how to stand in your natural posture. To reclaim your authentic self, you'll need to question the reflections you've accepted as truth. Imagine listing the traits you believe define you. Which ones are you proud of, and which ones cause discomfort or shame? Then consider whose voices influence these judgments. This exercise can be surprising, as you realize some of your most critical perceptions come from individuals who might not have known you well or were speaking from their own insecurities. Recognizing how flawed or incomplete these reflections can be is the first step in breaking free. Next, practice standing before a new kind of mirror, your internal one, which reflects your experiences, values, and evolving sense of self. Close your eyes and recall a moment when you felt genuinely alive and aligned. Perhaps it was losing track of time while immersed in a meaningful project or sharing a heartfelt conversation with a trusted friend. Notice which qualities emerged naturally in that setting. Maybe it was compassion, curiosity, or boldness. That glimpse of yourself is authentic, untainted by outside distortions. The more you connect with these glimpses, the less power the old reflections have over you. It's normal for doubt to creep in during this process. You may still wonder if your internal mirror is reliable, especially if you've spent years looking outward for validation. Rather than dismissing this doubt, acknowledge it as a sign you're exploring unfamiliar territory. Rebuilding trust in yourself is like learning a new language. It takes deliberate practice and time. Whenever you notice you're seeking someone else's approval to define who you are, pause and ask, do I believe this reflection aligns with what I know to be true about myself? Over time, these pauses accumulate into a transformative shift. You start to see that you're allowed to define your strengths and limitations based on first-hand experience, not inherited opinion. Each time you act in harmony with that internal sense of self, you reinforce it. That might mean honoring a creative spark even if people around you think it's frivolous, or setting a boundary even if it disappoints someone else. With each act of alignment, you reclaim a piece of yourself that had been scattered among others' distorted mirrors. As you progress, you'll find a gentle but profound confidence emerging. It's not loud or forced, but it's grounded in the truth that you're worthy of being known, not as a collection of others' reflections, but as your own unique presence. Moving beyond these shattered mirrors frees you to see yourself anew, forging a self-image resilient enough to stand on its own, yet flexible enough to keep evolving. In the coming chapters, you'll continue this inner realignment, discovering how it can reshape not just your self-perception, but also how you interact with the world. Chapter 5. The Weight of Should. You might be carrying a quiet burden made of expectations you never chose. It shows up whenever you tell yourself, I should be further along by now, or I should be more like them. These shoulds create a heavy sense of obligation, as if you're living under a contract you didn't sign. Over time, such obligations drain your energy and leave you with the uneasy feeling that you're living someone else's life. Tracing these shoulds back to their source often reveals a tangle of cultural conditioning, family traditions, or social pressures. Maybe your family valued a certain career path, or your community insisted on a particular definition of success. Rather than examining whether these ideals actually fit you, you may have absorbed them as unshakable truths. Yet each time you move toward fulfilling someone else's expectations, you drift further from your internal compass. It's like sailing with a map that leads you to a destination you never wanted to visit in the first place. The first step to lifting this weight is noticing your language. Start paying attention to every time you say or think the word should. Ask yourself, whose voice is behind this directive? If the answer isn't rooted in your genuine preference or values, consider challenging it. This might feel radical at first because you're breaking out of a long-held habit, but the relief you feel when you do is often immediate. You free yourself from an obligation that wasn't actually yours, opening space to choose a path that resonates with your deeper truth. Try replacing I should with I choose. For instance, if you catch yourself thinking, I should volunteer more, pause and reframe it as, I choose to volunteer. This shift in language can reveal whether the action aligns with your heart or if it's just another burden you feel pressured to carry. If it still resonates, you'll feel a sense of empowerment in the decision. If it doesn't, you'll recognize it as an artificial demand you no longer want to meet. Some might worry that letting go of shoulds means neglecting responsibilities. But authentic responsibility differs from forced obligation. Responsibility, when it's aligned with your values, feels purposeful rather than punitive. You still meet commitments, Perhaps it's caring for a loved one or meeting a work deadline, but you do so because it connects with your chosen sense of integrity and care. This nuanced distinction can transform chores or duties into expressions of who you truly are. As you experiment with dropping shoulds, you may encounter resistance or guilt. Loved ones might question your decisions if they conflict with old expectations. Yet the clarity you gain from acting in alignment with your true values will eventually shine through in your well-being. You'll feel lighter, more engaged, and better able to give to others, precisely because you're no longer fighting an internal battle of reluctant compliance. Over time, this shift rewires how you navigate life's choices. Rather than letting outside forces dictate your path, you begin to define it from within. You realize that freedom isn't about rejecting all obligations. It's about consciously choosing where to invest your energy. This choice, grounded in self-awareness, sets the stage for more meaningful action and greater fulfillment. The weight you once carried begins to diminish, replaced by a sense of possibility and personal authenticity. In the chapters ahead, you'll see how reclaiming your choice strengthens every aspect of your life, from relationships to the way you handle adversity, enabling you to shape your experience on your own terms. Chapter 6. The Cost of Numbing. Sometimes after a difficult day or a painful memory, you might find yourself reaching for something, scrolling endlessly through social media, indulging in comfort food, or zoning out with mindless entertainment, just to blunt the edge of discomfort. These habits can feel harmless, even necessary, but over time, they carry an unseen cost. The more you numb yourself to avoid pain, the more you also dull your capacity for genuine joy and growth. It's often easier to spot obvious addictions, like substance abuse, than to notice subtle forms of numbing that slip into everyday life. Yet these subtler distractions can be equally powerful in distancing you from your emotions. Consider how often you check your phone the moment an uneasy thought arises. Each quick escape might provide temporary relief, but also reinforces the notion that difficult feelings should be avoided at all costs. Over time, this avoidance robs you of valuable insights. Painful emotions, while uncomfortable, can guide you toward changes you need to make or truths you need to confront. One practical way to shift this pattern is to consciously pause when discomfort shows up. The next time you feel that pang of loneliness, disappointment, or anxiety, resist the urge to immediately distract yourself. Instead, take a moment to identify the feeling. Name it without judgment. This simple act of acknowledgement can be profoundly unsettling at first because you're accustomed to shying away. But as you stay with it, you'll discover that the sensation, while intense, is often transient. By leaning in gently, you grant yourself access to the underlying need or concern that the emotion is pointing to. If you struggle to sit with these sensations, try grounding yourself physically. That might mean placing a hand over your chest and breathing deeply, or feeling your feet firmly on the floor. This helps you remain present without being overwhelmed. The goal isn't to wallow in negative emotions, but to learn from them. When you stop numbing, feelings become data. Anger could reveal a boundary being crossed. Sadness might indicate a longing for deeper connection. Recognizing these cues can spark meaningful shifts, whether it's setting new boundaries or seeking more supportive relationships. Of course, moderation is key. There's nothing wrong with the occasional distraction if it's a conscious choice, rather than a habitual escape. The difference lies in intention. Are you choosing a brief break to recharge, or reflexively hiding from something that needs your attention? Building awareness around these moments gives you the power to decide. This is how you reclaim the energy that goes into running from yourself. Instead of scattering your emotional resources on numbing strategies, you channel them into living more fully, even when it's uncomfortable. As you gradually reduce your reliance on numbing behaviors, you'll begin to experience life with greater clarity. Both the highs and lows become more vivid. You might be surprised to find deeper appreciation in everyday moments, or a new surge of creativity once your mind isn't busy holding pain at bay. Discomfort will still arise, as it's part of being human, but you'll develop the resilience to meet it head-on, trusting that you can handle what comes. This opens the door to authentic connection with yourself and others, freeing you from the endless loop of seeking distraction. In the chapters ahead, you'll see how this newfound emotional capacity equips you to set boundaries, break unhelpful patterns, and ultimately redefine what it means to live a fulfilling life. Chapter 7. Boundaries as Freedom. You may have grown up thinking boundaries are walls that separate you from others, something cold or even selfish to enforce. But boundaries, when rooted in self-respect, are actually expressions of clarity and care, both for yourself and for those around you. They define where you end and another person begins, preserving the space you need to thrive. Without them, resentment and burnout often creep in, fueled by the silent belief that you must put your own needs last to keep the peace. Imagine your personal energy as a garden. Without a fence, anything can trample the soil. Unwanted demands, toxic interactions, or relentless expectations. Over time, the flowers you're trying to grow wither from neglect, overshadowed by whatever intrudes. A boundary acts like a protective fence, ensuring that your garden can flourish while still allowing healthy exchanges. It doesn't mean you stop caring about others. It means you recognize your responsibility to care for yourself as well. Learning to set boundaries often starts by identifying where you feel drained or taken for granted. Perhaps you consistently say yes to last-minute requests at work, or you find yourself making excuses for someone who invades your personal space. This silent agreement can stem from a fear of conflict or the desire to be seen as accommodating. But each time you suppress a no you want to voice, you undermine your integrity. Over time, this can lead to subtle but chronic feelings of anger or fatigue. The act of stating a boundary might feel nerve-wracking initially. You worry about how someone will react, or you fear losing their approval. Yet the moment you express it, whether it's telling a colleague you cannot handle an extra project this week, or letting a friend know you can't respond to messages at all hours, you experience a surge of self-respect. Even if discomfort follows, you'll notice that you feel more aligned with yourself. Boundaries don't have to be expressed harshly. A calm but firm tone often carries more weight than anger or frustration. Clearly stating, "I'm not available to discuss work after 8 p.m., sets an expectation that honors both parties' time. Over time, the benefits of enforcing boundaries become clear. You'll have more energy to devote to what truly matters, your relationships, passions, and personal well-being. You also send a clear message that you value yourself, which can elevate the way others perceive and treat you. Some people might test or resist your boundaries, especially if they've benefited from your previous lack of them. Yet each pushback is an opportunity to reaffirm where you stand, reinforcing the respect you have for yourself. Interestingly, boundaries can also deepen connection. They remove the silent resentments that build up when you consistently compromise beyond your comfort. By setting a boundary, you communicate your authentic needs, allowing others to understand you better. If they respond positively, it can bring a new level of mutual respect and honesty to the relationship. If they resist or react negatively, you gain clarity about whether that relationship can adapt to a healthier dynamic. Ultimately, boundaries are about creating freedom, not restriction. They give you room to breathe, to grow, and to show up fully rather than in a half-depleted state. When you take responsibility for your own emotional landscape, you also free others to do the same. In the next chapters, you'll see how strengthening these personal lines safeguards your energy and lays the groundwork for breaking patterns that no longer serve you, ensuring that your journey toward greater self-trust and alignment continues unhindered. Chapter 8. Breaking the Loop. Have you ever felt stuck in a cycle you can't quite escape? It could be a pattern of self-sabotage, like repeatedly walking away from opportunities that scare you, or falling into similar relationship conflicts time and again. Each time, you promise yourself it will be different, only to watch the same sequence play out, leaving you frustrated and doubting your ability to change. Think of these loops as well-worn paths in a forest. You walk them because they're familiar, even if they lead to places you don't want to go. These paths formed from accumulated experiences and beliefs, moments when fear or old conditioning compelled you to take the same course of action. The more you repeat them, the deeper the tracks become, making it harder to choose a new route. Yet no matter how deeply ingrained a pattern is, it can be interrupted by awareness and a deliberate shift. If you want to break a loop, the first step is recognizing when you're about to enter it. Take an example. You sense that you're on the verge of abandoning a meaningful project because you fear failure. In that split second of awareness, you can decide to respond differently. Instead of giving into avoidance, you might take a micro-action, like writing one more paragraph or making one phone call, to signal to yourself that you won't follow the usual path of retreat. This doesn't magically fix everything, but it disrupts the momentum of the old loop. As you practice these small disruptions, pay attention to how your body and mind respond. You may feel a spike in discomfort or anxiety because you're venturing off the familiar path. That's normal. Recognize it as a sign of growth rather than a signal to revert to old habits. Over time, these small acts of choosing differently carve out a new path, one that leads to results more aligned with who you want to become. It's also useful to question the core belief sustaining the loop. If you keep repeating a pattern of self-criticism, maybe there's a deeper assumption that you're unworthy or incapable. Rather than treating that thought as fact, challenge it by recalling moments when you successfully navigated challenges. Each real-life example stands as evidence against the limiting belief, gradually eroding its influence. The more you question these underlying assumptions, the weaker the loop becomes, and the easier it is to step away from it. The beauty of this process is that every disrupted loop creates space for new behaviors. Instead of living life on autopilot, you begin to exercise real choice. When a conflict arises, you might pause before reacting, offering a calmer response that prevents the usual blow-up. When an opportunity appears, you lean in instead of withdrawing. Each deviation from the old script strengthens your capacity to navigate future moments with clarity and intention. The journey is not about perfection, it's about progress. Each time you choose differently, you're rewriting the story of who you are. Over time, as these new paths become more familiar, you'll notice a sense of liberation. You're no longer bound by old narratives that kept you circling the same drain. Instead, you move through life with a growing sense of possibility. This shift in behavior spills into all areas of your experience, creating a ripple effect that touches your relationships, work, and self-image. In the chapters ahead, you'll continue this transformative process, learning to rewrite deep-seated beliefs about your own worth and potential, and stepping more firmly into the life you truly want to lead. Chapter 9. Rewriting Worth. There's a persistent misconception that self-worth is a currency you must earn. Perhaps you grew up believing that each achievement or external validation placed a deposit into your worth account, making you feel temporarily secure. But when life got difficult or people criticized you, those deposits seemed to vanish, plunging you into self-doubt. Living with this transactional view of worth is emotionally exhausting. You constantly hustle for approval, as though your value could evaporate at any moment. What if worth isn't something you accumulate, but something you inherently possess? Imagine a gold coin hidden under layers of dust and old newspapers in a forgotten attic. It remains gold, regardless of whether anyone sees it or values it. In the same way, your worth doesn't fluctuate with external circumstances. It's a constant presence within you, but it's often obscured by cultural conditioning and past experiences that taught you otherwise. To begin rewriting your narrative about worth, start by noticing the moments when you tie your value to performance or accolades. Maybe you think, if I can just prove myself at work, then I'll feel good enough. Acknowledge that mental trap and remind yourself that your efforts, successes, or failures don't change your fundamental value. This may feel awkward at first because you've likely spent a lifetime equating self-worth with external outcomes. Yet each time you reaffirm that your worth is stable, you loosen the grip of those old beliefs. An effective way to internalize this is to engage in acts of kindness or self-expression without seeking any external reward. Maybe you send a thoughtful note to a friend or pursue a creative project purely for the joy of it. Notice how fulfilling these actions can be when you're not anxiously awaiting applause. Over time, you come to rely less on validation from others. You discover a steady, internal sense of being enough, regardless of what you accomplish. Challenge the voice that tells you such a perspective is unrealistic. Often society encourages a merit-based view of everything, including personal value. But consider the quiet confidence of people who seem genuinely grounded. They aren't necessarily the ones with the most success or approval. They're the ones who know, deep down, they have nothing to prove. It's not that they lack ambition, They simply pursue goals from a place of wholeness rather than lack. Practice noticing your language when you talk to yourself. If you catch self-deprecating thoughts like, "I'll never be as good as them," pause and recognize that you're participating in a false comparison. Shift to a statement of inherent worth, such as, "I have a right to be here, just as I am." Even if it feels forced at first, repeating such affirmations can gradually reshape the cognitive pathways in your mind. Each time you do this, you're effectively dusting off that gold coin in the attic, letting more of its natural shine emerge. As you integrate this new perspective, your choices begin to change. You might take risks you avoided before because you're no longer equating failure with personal inadequacy. You might also walk away from situations that drain you, trusting that you deserve better. This transformation is subtle, yet powerful, freeing you to explore life without the chains of performance-based validation. In upcoming chapters, you'll deepen this shift by confronting what you fear and learning to interpret that fear as a guide rather than a verdict on your worth. Chapter 10. Fear as compass. Fear can feel like a stop sign blocking the road to your aspirations. Whether it's a fear of rejection, failure, or the unknown, it often convinces you that the best course of action is to turn around and retreat. But what if fear isn't a roadblock at all? What if it's actually a sign that you're standing on the threshold of something meaningful? This perspective might sound counterintuitive, yet seeing fear as a compass can transform the way you engage with challenges. Think about the last time you felt genuinely afraid. Maybe you were considering a change in career, or perhaps you were about to open up emotionally to someone you trust. Beneath the surface panic, there was probably a sense that what you were doing mattered on a deeper level. Fear tends to show up when we're stepping out of our comfort zone into territory where growth becomes possible. In that sense, it's a powerful indicator that you're moving towards something significant. The key is learning to differentiate between fears that protect you from real harm and fears that simply reflect uncertainty or self-doubt. If you're in actual danger, your fear response is vital. But most of the time, the fear you encounter in daily life is psychological, spurred by imagined catastrophes or concerns about your worth. Paying attention to the nuance of your fear allows you to assess whether it's a genuine warning or an invitation to stretch yourself. Next time you feel fear creeping in, don't run from it. Investigate it. Ask, "What am I really afraid of here?" Then go a step deeper. If that fear came true, what would happen? Often, you'll find the worst-case scenario is survivable, or not nearly as disastrous as you initially imagined. Even if it were to happen, you might realize you have the resilience to handle it. This level of scrutiny demystifies fear, shrinking it from an insurmountable monster into a manageable challenge. Try transforming small moments of fear into moments of exploration. If you feel a flutter of anxiety about having a difficult conversation, recognize it as a sign that the discussion matters to you. By moving through that fear, you might discover a new level of honesty with someone you care about. Each time you walk through the doorway fear highlights, you gain evidence of your own strength and adaptability. Over time, this builds confidence that you can handle more than you once believed possible. Developing this habit also shifts your broader outlook on life. You stop interpreting fear as an automatic stop sign and start seeing it as useful data. It might direct you toward the very thing that will help you grow. In doing so, you free yourself from countless missed opportunities caused by avoidance. Progress replaces stagnation, and new possibilities emerge. This doesn't mean life becomes easy or without anxiety, but you learn to engage with challenges instead of hiding from them. Stepping into this mindset is a turning point in how you meet uncertainty. You begin to trust that you can find a way through discomfort. This trust isn't blind optimism. It's rooted in the experiences you accumulate each time you face a fear and come out stronger. As you build on the principles of inherent worth from the previous chapter, you'll see how facing fear with curiosity rather than dread reinforces your evolving sense of self. In the chapters ahead, you'll learn to apply this courage to other areas of your life, including how you handle setbacks and how boldly you express your voice in the world. Chapter 11. Embracing the fall. No matter how prepared or capable you are, moments of failure can strike with a force that knocks the wind out of you. It might be the project that collapsed after months of work, or the relationship you couldn't salvage despite your best intentions. In that raw aftermath, you can't help but feel exposed. Failure, however, is not necessarily a verdict on your value. It can also be a doorway to a profound shift in how you view yourself and the world. The sting of disappointment, while painful, often contains lessons that lead to more resilient, authentic living. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a diving board, hesitating. You've played out a scenario in your head. Will you dive smoothly, or land with an embarrassing belly flop? Perfectionist or not, you might freeze when faced with a chance of a painful landing. Yet think of what happens when you do leap. Even if the initial impact hurts, you realize you survived, and in surviving, you gain experience and courage. Each tumble reveals a piece of the puzzle you didn't see before. Maybe you discover an overlooked detail, a skill to sharpen, or a deeper motivation to adapt. Through that process, you become more than you were before. This new perspective begins with acknowledging that failure isn't a sign of incompetence. It's part of the natural rhythm of growth. Consider how every musician you admire has bungled performances. Each misstep taught them about their craft, pushing them beyond their comfort zone. Similarly, your own stumbles can serve as stepping stones, propelling you into new territory. Reflect on a failure from your past, something that felt devastating in the moment. Then examine how it eventually led to an unexpected outcome. Perhaps it forced you to pivot to a new path that suited you better, or it revealed people who genuinely cared enough to support you at your lowest. There is a certain humility that comes with accepting failure. You let go of the pressure to be invincible and open yourself to becoming more adaptable. This shift in mindset can encourage you to take risks you might otherwise avoid. Paradoxically, once you see failure as a natural element of progress, the fear of it loses some of its power. That shift allows you to move through life with a different kind of confidence. Not the false bravado of never falling, but the calm assurance that if you do fall, you can rise again. Try a small experiment. Pick an area of your life where you fear making mistakes, maybe sharing your writing publicly, or tackling a challenging fitness goal. Instead of aiming for a flawless outcome, invite yourself to show up bravely and let imperfection be part of the deal. It may feel uncomfortable, but observe how this reframes your effort. Instead of seeing any slip as a catastrophe, you treat it as part of a larger learning process. You might even keep a journal documenting the missteps, highlighting not just the error, but what you learned from it. Over time, reviewing these entries can reveal a pattern of resilience you never noticed before. As you integrate these insights, notice how it changes your emotional landscape. Disappointment still stings, but it no longer robs you of hope or self-respect. You start to trust in your capacity to handle setbacks, which in turn lets you chase bigger dreams and form deeper connections. People around you may also sense this shift, seeing how you respond with curiosity rather than defeat. Embracing the fall becomes an act of courage that frees you from rigid expectations. It's a pivotal step toward a more expansive life, a life that holds room for both triumphs and stumbles. In the chapters ahead, you'll discover how this newfound resilience lays a foundation for speaking your truth and forging a sense of personal time and freedom that no failure can take from you. Chapter 12. Owning your voice. There's a silent weight you may have carried your whole life. The fear that if you speak your mind, you'll be ridiculed, ignored, or misunderstood. This fear can prompt you to stay quiet in meetings, nod along with ideas you disagree with, or whisper your dreams only to yourself. Over time, your voice, the unique way you interpret the world and express it, can feel like it's been muted. Yet that voice is a powerful key to your authenticity. Each time you speak up for what you believe or need, you reinforce who you truly are. Owning your voice starts with identifying the moments you hold back. Perhaps you're in a group conversation and the topic shifts to something you care about deeply, but you keep silent. Ask yourself why. Are you worried others will dismiss you? Do you fear coming across as too opinionated? Recognizing these patterns opens a door to self-examination. Every time you bite your tongue, there's a clue about a deeper concern. Maybe it's a fear of creating conflict, or maybe it's the old belief that you're not knowledgeable enough to weigh in. You can begin breaking this habit by sharing one idea or preference in a relatively safe context. It might be as simple as suggesting the restaurant you really want to visit instead of going with the usual choice. Pay attention to what happens when you do. The sky doesn't fall. You might feel a small rush of liberation. Even if someone disagrees, you learn to handle that discomfort without compromising who you are. This process is like building a muscle. Start light, then gradually increase the weight as your confidence grows. Another pathway to freeing your voice involves creativity. If speaking up in real time feels intimidating, try writing down your thoughts privately, whether in a journal or in letters you may never send. Allow yourself full honesty without the pressure of an immediate audience. Over time, the clarity you gain from writing can translate into spoken words. You begin to see patterns in what truly matters to you, which makes it easier to voice those priorities when the time comes. As you grow more comfortable expressing yourself, you'll notice how it reshapes your relationships. Authenticity invites others to be genuine in return. You shift from superficial exchanges to deeper, more meaningful conversations. You may also discover that some connections fade because they were built on your silence. This can be unsettling, but it makes room for relationships that honor your true expression. You learn that owning your voice isn't just about you, it's about establishing healthy, reciprocal dynamics. This newfound openness weaves into every aspect of your life. In the workplace, you bring forward ideas without second-guessing your competence. In personal conversations, you share your feelings rather than bottling them up, which can reduce resentment and misunderstanding. Even your internal dialogue changes. You stop telling yourself to keep quiet, recognizing that your perspective has legitimate value. Each time you honor it, you affirm your own importance in the world. Though it may take time to speak as openly as you wish, each step forward marks a victory over ingrained patterns of self-censorship. Courage accumulates, and so does the respect you garner from both yourself and others. You're not forcing anyone to agree with you. You're simply standing firm in your right to be heard. This sets the stage for the upcoming chapters, where you'll learn to apply your growing self-expression to reclaiming your time and shaping relationships that nurture rather than constrict you, moving ever closer to a life that reflects the true depth of who you are. Chapter 13. Reclaiming Time. In a world that often idolizes busyness, it's easy to feel like time is slipping through your fingers. Your schedule might be crammed with obligations, your mind perpetually buzzing with the next to-do. But what if time isn't just something you manage? What if it's an essential resource that reflects the life you genuinely want to live? When you begin to see time as a mirror of your values, rather than a source of unrelenting pressure, everything changes. The first step in reclaiming time is recognizing where it goes. You might discover you lose hours scrolling through social media or doing tasks that offer little fulfillment. Perhaps you find yourself committing to activities purely out of guilt or habit. Pausing to take an honest inventory of how you spend your days can be revealing. Write down everything you do for a few days, from the major tasks to the small distractions, and examine what truly matters versus what fills space. This awareness invites you to realign your schedule with your priorities. Picture a shelf where each slot represents a portion of your day. You have the power to decide what goes on each shelf, yet you might have let others stack their items there without question. Reclaiming time doesn't always mean drastic life changes. It can start with small shifts, such as setting aside 15 minutes in the morning for something restorative, a walk, journaling, or simply breathing in silence. Rather than viewing this as an indulgence, recognize it as an act of self-respect that affects your well-being for the rest of the day. You might worry that prioritizing your own needs will cause conflict or disappointment. Yet boundaries around time can be as vital as any other boundary. If you feel anxious about declining a request, ask yourself whether it aligns with your deeper goals or values. If the answer is no, consider a gentle but firm refusal or a renegotiation of terms. Each time you honor what genuinely matters, you strengthen your sense of agency. That internal confidence can spill over into other areas of life, making you more present and engaged. A useful exercise is to identify your time leaks, areas where minutes or hours vanish without any meaningful return. It may be mindless channel surfing or an endless rabbit hole of online shopping. Instead of labeling these habits as bad, get curious about why they happen. Are you avoiding boredom or stress? Are they your method of unwinding? If so, Could there be a more nourishing way to decompress? A short walk, a hot shower, or a few pages of reading can offer genuine restoration without turning into an entire evening lost. As you start to reclaim small pockets of time, you'll likely sense a shift. You become more discerning about who and what gets your attention. That doesn't mean you cut off the world. It means you're intentional about how you engage with it. This clarity often reveals hidden desires, projects you'd love to pursue, relationships you want to nurture, or solo pursuits you never gave yourself permission to enjoy. What once felt like an oppressive to-do list morphs into a canvas you get to fill with experiences that energize and fulfill you. This fresh relationship with time isn't about maximum efficiency, it's about alignment. When your actions match your values, you move through days with a calmer sense of purpose. You're not racing the clock, you're working with it. Each moment reclaimed enriches the tapestry of your life, offering a sense of presence in both routine tasks and special occasions. This foundation sets the stage for the next chapters, where you'll apply this sense of clarity to more intimate aspects of your life, exploring how boundaries and choices transform relationships into spaces of mutual growth rather than obligation. Chapter 14. Love without chains. Relationships can be beautiful, but they can also become subtle traps if they're built on fear or unmet needs. It's common to seek completion in another person, hoping they'll fill a void you feel inside. But this dynamic can create hidden chains, codependency, constant reassurance seeking, or a quiet sense that if the other person changes or leaves, your world crumbles. True connection thrives when each individual stands grounded in self-sourced love, free from the pressure to become someone else's missing piece. Consider how you interact in your closest relationships. Are you genuinely sharing your life, or are you clinging to someone for validation? Sometimes, your need for safety might nudge you to over-accommodate, diminishing parts of yourself to keep the peace. Conversely, you might unconsciously expect the other person to handle your emotional baggage. In either case, the bond becomes tangled in unspoken dependence. It's a fragile arrangement that can unravel under stress, leaving you feeling hollow and resentful. Begin disentangling these chains by acknowledging your wholeness as an individual. Though you crave connection, you're capable of standing on your own. One way to cultivate this mindset is to spend intentional time by yourself, reading, reflecting, or pursuing a hobby you don't share with anyone else. This practice offers more than solitude. It builds an internal reservoir of self-reliance. You're reminded that your identity isn't solely defined by your role in someone else's life. Notice how this shift impacts your interactions. When you're no longer looking for someone to fix you, you can engage with them in a more balanced way. You stop insisting on constant reassurance or validation, which can open the door to deeper communication. Conflicts may still arise, but they become opportunities to understand each other's perspectives rather than emergencies that threaten your sense of self-worth. Each discussion remains grounded in a mutual desire to connect, not in a desperate need to fill an emotional vacuum. It's also important to let go of the assumption that you must sacrifice your boundaries for love. Healthy love involves mutual respect for personal space and individuality. By setting clear limits, whether about how you spend your time, the privacy you need, or how you communicate disagreements, you create a container where both you and your partner can flourish. This may seem counterintuitive if you've been taught that real intimacy means endless closeness. But in reality, respecting each other's boundaries can intensify genuine closeness, free from the anxieties of enmeshment. As you transition from codependency to a more self-sourced kind of love, you may notice increased tension with those accustomed to the old dynamic. They might feel unsettled that you're no longer behaving the way you did. This is a natural phase of adjustment. Stay gentle but firm, reiterating that your shift is about creating a healthier foundation. Over time, relationships either adapt and strengthen or reveal themselves as incapable of true connection. Though this realization can be painful, it clears space for more aligned bonds in your life. Ultimately, love without chains isn't about isolation or emotional distance. It's about recognizing that each individual is complete in their own right. Together, you form a partnership that enhances your separate lives rather than one that merges into a single dependent entity. You bring your authentic self to the table, and so does the other person. This shared authenticity fosters trust and growth, creating an environment where vulnerability becomes a source of liberation rather than fear. In the final chapter, you'll see how all these insights come together, guiding you toward a sense of enoughness that isn't a destination, but a daily practice that infuses every corner of your life with gratitude and possibility. Chapter 15. The Art of Enough. You may have spent years striving for a finish line, a moment when you'd finally feel complete. Perhaps you hoped a certain job, relationship, or achievement would signal your arrival. Yet each time, that feeling of permanent satisfaction slipped away, replaced by a new goal or expectation. This elusive pursuit can feel like a treadmill you can't step off. The art of enough lies in realizing that a sense of wholeness isn't something you'll find on the horizon. It's a lens you choose to look through right now, a steady awareness that who you are and what you have can be enough without stifling your capacity to evolve. Cultivating this mindset starts with noticing the language you use around progress. Do you phrase your goals as if you'll only be worthy once they're accomplished? Shift toward recognizing that your desires can coexist with gratitude for the present moment. You aim for growth not because you're lacking, but because you're capable of expansion. This perspective creates a softer, yet more potent motivation. Instead of chasing an ideal to fill a perceived void, you're exploring new horizons from a foundation of inherent completeness. A tangible way to integrate this is through a daily reflection on sufficiency. At the end of the day, reflect on 3 things that felt right no matter how small: a meaningful conversation, a moment of laughter, or a task completed with care. Notice how acknowledging these wins, even modest ones, can soothe the restless urge to keep pushing. You begin to see that life is filled with moments of enoughness, a constant flow of experiences waiting to be recognized. This shift doesn't eliminate ambition, but it reshapes it, removing the frantic undercurrent that says you must constantly outperform your past self. Observe how this new lens affects your emotional equilibrium. When you understand that right here, right now, you have enough to appreciate, you approach challenges with less desperation. A setback doesn't become a global indictment of your life. It's just another event in a life that is already rich in many ways. You're more open to creative solutions and more resilient in the face of disappointment. Paradoxically, feeling enough can make you more resourceful, since you're not clouded by panic over what you lack. This sense of enough also impacts how you relate to others. You stop comparing your journey to theirs, recognizing that everyone's path has its unique contours. When you're not operating from scarcity, you can celebrate others' achievements without jealousy, and you can accept support without shame. The contentment you cultivate within becomes a quality you share with those around you. Instead of extracting validation from relationships or material gains, you give and receive freely, fueled by an inner reservoir of self-acceptance. Reaching this stage of the journey, you realize that the transformation isn't about finding a final answer. It's an ongoing practice of noticing each moment's completeness, even as you evolve. There will still be days of doubt and striving, times when you feel the pull of old insecurities. But you have new tools now, clearer boundaries, a renewed sense of self-worth, and an understanding that fear can guide you toward growth rather than away from it. You also appreciate that your worth doesn't hinge on perfection or constant achievement. Each chapter you've traversed points to this truth. Your foundation isn't cracked. Your need for more is a mirage. Your imperfections aren't liabilities, and your voice matters as much as anyone else's. You are already whole, though you will keep growing. And therein lies the enduring beauty of the art of enough.